everyone. This is Anshul, and this is the June15 Podcast. And today we have with us a very special guest, Jody Padar. Jody is known as the Radical CPA. She is a multi book author. She has written three books. Her latest book, Radical Pricing, came out in May 2004 and has been flying off the shelves. She is a big advocate of building a next generation firm of CPA firms adopting technology. And she has been consistently named as one of the top 100 most influential people by Accounting Today. Jody, thank you so much for being on the podcast and welcome.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Let's start with your background. I want to know, how did you get started and how did you become to be known as the Radical CPA?
Sure. So I began my career in old school firm, seven partners, like a couple different firms like that. And in 2006, I left those firms to essentially go out on my own, start my own firm. But technically, I joined my dad. He had a small 1040 practice. He was a director of tax by day and had his 1040 practice at night. So technically, I grew up in a CPA firm, right? Hearing my dad talk to clients all the time when I was little. And then, came off this bad tax season and said, okay, there's got to be a different way. And just so happened at that time, that's when cloud technology was changing and it was starting. And so I really got involved in cloud technology. And I realized that when I utilized cloud technology, it fundamentally changed a firm. And that's what most firms still haven't adapted to, because less than 10% of the CPA firms today are all cloud. And if you look at the way old school firms work versus new cloud firms work, they work in fundamentally different ways. And because like cloud technology was just starting at that time, I was one of a handful of practitioners who iterated through that business model change. And we utilized technology different and we changed the way our firms worked. So customer experience became a thing. We started pricing clients differently. We used technology different. We used social media, right? Like that's what they call the new firm today. I was pioneering in 2010. So to me, it's not new, it's old, but it's only getting faster because of the way AI and the new technologies are even going to change that firm moving forward. But that's kind of how I started. I owned that firm for 14 years. I sold it in 2020. I joined BotKeeper. I worked for BotKeeper for 2 years. Then I joined April. And BotKeeper is machine learning and artificial intelligence for bookkeeping. And then I was recruited away to April, and April builds consumer tax software. And we built tax software from the ground up, which hasn't been done in 30 years. So I have firm experience, but I also have technology startup experience where I've been on both the go-to-market and the build of product side. So I think it makes me pretty uniquely qualified in the accounting space to understand how tech really impacts what firms and how the future is going to be created. Because I don't think the future is going to be built in a traditional old school firm model. It's going to be built in a combination of technology and professional services.
I completely agree. And that's quite an impressive resume. Like one thing that stood out was less than 10% firms are like even today are fully on cloud.
Right.
Like, as I think about my business, right, offshoring and like direct ownership, whatever. But if that's the case, that's the biggest challenge, not anything else, right? Because
Right, because the problem is not the technology, it's the real time that cloud brings that firms haven't adapted to, right? They haven't changed the way they work to work with customers in real time, and that's what the cloud does. And there's still too much transferring back of files and things like that. And so it it if you go back to why I began doing what I began doing, it was to get better technology so that I could serve my clients better. And the reason I started talking to a lot of technology companies, way back when, And they were like, well, we need more accountants. And I was like, well, I need better technology. And they were like, we need more accountants, right? And it was this whole chicken and the egg thing. And unfortunately, like the technology can only evolve as fast as the professional utilize the technology. So
Yep.
we really have to move the market, the profession, everyone forward together so that we can actually serve our end user, our customers better. And I think people are going to be in for a shock when they realize how fast AI is going to change things, because it's almost like it's going to leapfrog. So for
Yep.
the people who never like adapted to the cloud, like, not to say don't do it, but my thing is, well, like if you wait another 2 minutes, AI is just going to take over a lot of that stuff anyway. So it's an interesting position that the market is in. And the only reason the firms are even as far along as they are today is because the pandemic happened. And if because the pandemic pushed a lot of people forward, but again, the business model and the way CPAs work hasn't really caught up to the way technology operates and how you should be interacting with your customer in that real-time basis.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, so I'm new to the accounting world, but one of the things that I've seen in the last 2 years is just how slow people are to change,
Mhm.
especially like to new models, new technology. So let's actually talk about AI. Since you brought it up, we'll get to the other questions that I had after this one. Like, how do you recommend that firms use AI? Right? It's like there's a lot of talk about, hey, this is what it could do, but like realistically, how can firms use AI or like automation like today?
So if you're a techie, and when I say techie, meaning you like shiny new objects, you like to play, you like to figure things out, then you should start playing with AI and models and things like that. And like it used to, like you have Chat GPT, you have it right in your Google now. Like it's everywhere. It's kind of like just showing up. If you're someone who doesn't like to play, or technology is a little bit intimidating, you don't have to really learn AI. It's going to be in the tools that you use every day, and it'll start just magically appearing in your regular accounting software. So for those of you who don't like to play, go ahead and wait a little bit. But for those who like to experience new things, just go sign up for ChatGPT, or sign up for some of the other models, and just start asking it questions, and watch some videos, whatever, and start to learn how to create these prompts. Because what prompts are is basically the way you ask a question, and learn that way. Because the way you ask a question, it just takes a little bit of experience to get it to spit out what you want. I use it every day in my writing. I have my own bot that I fed it all my information, like basically because I have like a ton of books and content, and I ask her how I would say things, which is kind of funny, right? Like instead of me writing things out, I've basically trained a bot to be Jody, and I ask her questions and she'll give it to me back in Jody speak. Now, like, so she's kind of a vanity bot right now, but it's kind of just the way you have to start experimenting with things, and it's curiosity. Like with anything, just be curious, but don't put client data out there. Like, I don't know if I have to say those things, but just start
I think
playing
you
with
do.
it.
Because I think that's the
Another
biggest challenge
one
with
of
data,
my
right?
favorite AI Yeah,
Please.
another one of my favorite bots to play with is Pi, and she's the Siri or the Alexa you always wanted, and you can just talk to her like a human, and she talks back to you. And I think that's another easy way for someone who's a little bit more apprehensive. Like if you're used to having Alexa, Pi is next level.
I think that's fantastic advice because when I think I guess based on your definition, I'm a techie. I love shiny new objects. Like I've signed up for ChatGPT the day it was available.
Yeah.
Um, but like when I hear conversations around AI, a lot of those are so big that oh, it's going to replace accountants, it's going to replace this, you're going to have to change everything. And I think that just people get cold feet. They really don't know where to start. So I
So
really like your advice that start playing with it. Just don't worry too much. Start playing with it. Get yourself comfortable.
Yeah, and I don't think AI is going to replace you. I think it's going to replace what you do, right? Like it's the way you do things is going to change, but it's not going to replace you. You're going to have to level up your skill set. You're going to have to change the way you do things. But what most accountants don't realize is the depth of data that's in the world that AI will help us contextualize and give context to and make sense of, and it's data that we haven't seen before, so it's kind of been out of our like our eyesight, and so we just ignore it like it doesn't exist, and we make these decisions based on data that's false or non-existent. And what AI is going to do, it's going to bring in more data, but we're still going to have contextual like we're going to have to understand the context of it, and then we're going to make bigger and better decisions based on the opportunity to explore more data. And so what we do is going to change a little bit, but there's still going to be so much work to do and like evolution of work. And if you think about what an accountant does today versus what an accountant did pre-web, they do different things because of the access to what like the internet gave us. So we just need to think in those terms that like, yeah, what we do is going to change, but what you did 20 years ago changed too. And you're still relevant. You still have a job. You just have to evolve it. And another like good example is social media. Social media didn't exist and it came out like 2008, 2009, right? Part of my job is social media now, right? And it didn't even exist way back when. So whatever you do, like you just have to be ready for change. And that's the reality of the world. It doesn't matter what position, whether you're an accountant or a physician or whatever, everybody's job is going to evolve, and it should. And like, I don't know, people make themselves crazy over nothing. They get anxious over things that aren't really relevant.
Oh, I agree. I think people misunderstand AI. Like it's just a new buzzword, right? AI
Right.
is really computer making decisions based on data, and that's existed since the 1980s, right? Excel is AI. It's just the only thing that
Yeah.
has changed
Clippy is
is
AI too.
Clippy is
Like,
AI. Yeah, right. I remember Clippy. Right. So those things, right? What has changed now is that with these language models, you can talk to a computer, like you can talk to an AI model like we're talking, as opposed to having your developer, do things for you. So I completely agree. Like people ask me, like, aren't you scared? Like you help build global teams. Like with the advent of AI, people won't need to build teams outside of US or offshoring is going to go away. And I tell them, I don't think it's going to go away. It's going to change. I don't know exactly how it will change, but think about like a chat GPT that takes away all the problems that are associated with hiring a global team member, cultural issues, waiting till your morning so that they can ask you questions. If you can like, you created like a Jody, right? A Jody bot. Like if every managing
right.
partner could create their bot, that just makes their global team so much more efficient. So I agree. It's going to change things. It's not going to replace 99% of the people. Some people, yeah, their jobs will
And
get
I think
redundant.
we'll make more work. We'll make more work for ourselves.
Oh,
Like
we will. Yeah,
stuff that we
absolutely.
never did before, we'll just create more work because that's what people like to do, right? Like
Oh,
think of
absolutely. We live in an economy. We gotta sell things, right? Even if
right.
we'll figure a way out to make sure that we still make more money. So we'll do that. So now let's talk about your book, right? That was one of the first things I wanted to ask, but we had started the discussion on AI, so I thought we'll continue. Tell us more about the book Radical Pricing, right? What's the book about?
So radical pricing is pricing at its core, but it's more than that. It's the business model shift that has to happen because we live in this new world. And the new world is, who's our competition? Is it a technology company or is it a CPA firm? I would argue it's a technology company. It's not another CPA firm. Um, I would argue that you have to change the way you deliver services on the back end. Um, in order for pricing to work. So it's really this business model shift, and it's more than just pricing. But we know everybody's talking about pricing because of AI and some of the other things that are changing in the world. And again, this new firm that I created back in 2010, it was the beginning of it, of pricing. And now like I'm so excited because as I see all the new technology coming and the way to really kind of adopt your pricing, it just gets it just gets more exciting to me. But it's really a holistic approach of how pricing fundamentally changes your firm at its core. And the best part about my book is there's questions in it to have you kind of think about your firm and how you can change your firm to adapt to these new ways. Because I think a lot of people talk about pricing, but they don't give you the kind of how to. And this book truly gives you the how to of how to change your firm.
So, like we on our in our last conversation, you mentioned that you've written two more books, but this one's been taking off like a lot sooner. It's just exceeding all your expectations. So, I'm curious, like, other than the fact that yes, now you're doing this for the third time, but was there anything happening in the market that just made what you're offering so much more lucrative, right? What?
So I'm that first mover, right? Like I'm usually ahead of everybody else. And my first two books were too far ahead of the market. This book, and honestly, I wrote it a few years ago. I kind of explained a lot a few years ago, but it kind of sat for a little bit, and then we brought it back and we kind of massaged it and we got it ready to release. It's ready for the market today because the market is ready for it. It's kind of like any other product market fit. Like it's just the market is finally ready to hear that pricing has to change because they felt it for years, but the pain wasn't great enough for them to change. And because pain has to be really great for people to actually change. So I believe even though they felt that there were outside forces now, I think post-pandemic, whatever, they really feel the need to change. And that's why pricing is so relevant. And I think they're afraid. They're afraid of AI coming in because I always used to say, how do you build 2 minutes with the cloud? Well, guess what? AI can do something in 10 seconds. Well, how do you build 10 seconds? You can't. You have to change your pricing model to focus on outcomes, to focus on the value you deliver, not on how long it took. Because what are you going to put on your line item? Like I was at a session at Engage and someone asked a question, how they build for AI. And it made me want to cry because I was like, you don't build for AI. You build for the service you deliver. You build for the outcome you achieve for your client. You don't build for AI. So
And like,
the
is
time is
there
right.
the time is right? Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think with everything that's happening in the industry, right? Talent shortages, like advent of AI, private equity coming in, boomers retiring, like something needs to fundamentally change. And like one of the things that I saw as an outsider coming into this industry was when people are talking about talent shortages, they were like, well, the busy season gets like, there's no work-life balance during that time. And I came from tech. I was like, well, that was every month for me, right? There was no
Right.
work-life balance for like 12 months. I remember in business school, like consulting firms would come and they'd be like, you got to work 80 hours. And people would still clamor to get an interview with investment banks, right? They were almost proud of the fact that there's no work-life balance. But for me, I just felt like, hey, it came down to compensation. Like people aren't getting paid well for the amount of work that they're being asked to do. And I think that also goes back to like what you said, like pricing, business models. Most firms are operating on archaic business models. Their pricing hasn't been updated for like decades, like for 10 years or so. So it just, I think you've hit the nail on the head that pricing and business model, like that's really the root cause of a lot of problems that we're seeing right now.
Well, right, because if you bill by the hour, you have no time to change. You have because everything's based on a billable hour. So like if you measure your employees based on a billable hour, you can't give them 20% of their time to work on innovation. You can't give them 20% of their time to update processes, to do anything that a firm needs. You can't give them 20% of their time to learn something new, right? Because they're this cog in a wheel. And if they're not billing for their time because because you live in this billable hour, now this firm stagnates. And maybe it worked in 1980, but it certainly doesn't work today because the world moves at a much faster pace and you need to be moving faster. And we also have the impact of seasonality, right? Like tax season is not a season anymore. It's all year long, right? Like there's never a break. It used to be like, oh, you would have a tax season, then you get a break. No, there's no break. it's like busy, busy, busy. And then you have closes, right? So you're either fighting tax season or you're fighting to get your work done in between a close. And then you have month close, quarter close, year end, whatever. So we live in this perpetual state of busy, and we have no extra time to innovate or iterate through what a new business model could look like. And the other side of it is firms have been profitable. A lot of partners are laughing all the way to the bank. So they're like, well, why would I change it? Like, it doesn't, like, I'm making money. What do I care? Except
Yeah.
the new talent says, haha, I'm not doing it. Right. Like, talk to a Gen Y and they're like, yeah, not for me. Like, they're going to work in other things. They're going to work in data or tech or whatever because they're making more money. And so nobody wants to be an accountant anymore. Like, they feel like it's not like it's not the badge of honor. Boomers live by that badge of honor of, oh my God, I'm working all these hours. And the next gen, if you can get them to work 40 hours a week, you're lucky, right? Like, that's not the way they live. They live in this lifestyle. They have different values. And I would argue Gen X and millennials had it. Gen X just didn't have the guts to say it. They felt it. They just didn't have the guts to say it. And the next gen doesn't, they don't, there's no filter there for the next gen. They say what they
Yeah.
want and they just move on. So when you combined all these things, it's like the perfect storm, which quite honestly, I'm thrilled about. I've been like beating this bandwagon for 15 years. So let it move. And I thought the pandemic was really going to move it, and it was going to move it 100%. And it's moving it, but it's like it moved back. It was like it moved and then it moved back a little, but now it's like starting to move forward again. So I think we're getting there. And I think AI is going to just flip it faster. And a lot of those boomers are just going to die. And that's okay, right? Like, it's the circle of
I thought you
life.
were going to say retire, but okay, I'll take that too.
But they are realistically, right? Like, they're and their firms are going to die with them, because guess what? Nobody wants that book. Nobody wants to buy that firm. So that's why I say it's going to die, because either the partner's going to die on their desk because a lot of them won't give up or like keep doing everything the way they used to do it. They don't care. And then or like that book of business, nobody's going to purchase it. It's just going to go away, because why would I buy it if I could get it for free
Yep.
doing marketing or other things? So like they're going to just go away. And then you have private equity coming in at the top end of the market, who's saying nothing has changed in 30 years. And if we put money on this business model and we increase technology and we actually run it like we should, and we look at profitability of clients, and we don't just keep clients because I have a relationship with them, even though I haven't charged them enough for the last 10 years. And partners don't like that. And a lot of accountants don't like it because they're like, oh, but they're my client. Well, they're not profitable to you. So why do you let them drag your firm down? And then they blame the PE firm. Well, PE's coming in because they're looking at it from a business model perspective and a profitability perspective, not because they've had a relationship with this client for the last 10 years, right? Like, there's a different focus on it. You can take whatever camp you want, but again, they're coming in and they're changing things. And the reason they're changing things is because it hasn't changed in 30 years, and they see an opportunity to make money, because they wouldn't be here if they didn't. Like, they're coming because they're coming to make money. I would say
Yeah.
most accountants work because they love helping clients. PE comes because they want to make money. So you have two fundamentally different schools of thought or visions, and now you're combining them. And some people like it, some people don't, whatever. Again, you can be on the PE love side or the PE hate side, but the reality is the market is changed because of outside forces, and now you have to adapt to that market. And I would say too, VC is coming in and they're building technologies to update as well, right? Like, so again, 30 years, nothing's changed. Why do they come into the market? Because for 30 years, nothing's changed. So when nothing has changed in 30 years, there's a huge opportunity for profit. And that's why they're here. They're here to make money.
Oh, absolutely. They love businesses that are traditional, that haven't adopted to technology, that haven't found ways to improve their profit margins, and they come and do it.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't, I mean, people, there's a lot of people who talk trash about private equity, but I'm like, they're here to stay. And And like one thing that you said, a lot of boomers, right? Their businesses are just gonna die. And you're right. Anybody who's not changing their business models, they're not adopting technology, adapting technology. It's their businesses are just gonna die. Because
Eh,
even when somebody comes to buy them, right? They look at the book and they're like, this just doesn't make sense, right? There's
yeah,
yeah,
it's that and the thing about it is when I started on my kind of like mission, my movement to change the world, I really did it from the goodness of my heart. I still do it from the goodness of my heart, but it was really about all these boomers had these beautiful businesses and I didn't want them to go extinct. And I've been talking about it for 15 years. And at a certain point, you just got to say, like, you're not getting it. Like, I can't do, not that I can't do it anymore, but like, you had your opportunity for the last 15 years to move incrementally along and you chose not to move. So now, like, I have no feeling of remorse for these guys who, their businesses aren't worth anything because like for 15 years I've been talking about it. And I'm not the only one who's been beating this drum. There's a bunch of people who have said, "Hey, you need to change. Hey, you need to change." If you choose not to change, well then when your business is not worth anything, so be it.
what percentage of firms out there do you think fit this thing where their
40%,
business? Whoa, that's
40%. I think
that's a big
10% are
number.
cloud. I think there's a bunch in the middle. So if 10% are cloud and 40% are not worth anything, you have 50% left. And of those 50%, their books are worth something, but they're going to get eaten up by the bigger firms. So they're just going to, the big are going to get bigger, the middle's going to just go away. It's just going to be gone. And the small, there'll always be room for small new people because there are always some people who don't want to go to a big firm. So, that solo practitioner. But those solo practitioners are going to be young next gen firm owners who do things differently. And that's just the CPA firm market. We're not even talking about Intuit, who's going to take a ton of business away from the small practitioner. And you can say they're not, like they'll tell you they're not, but you can't fight the fact that if someone's logging into QuickBooks and there's a pop-up there that says, would you like to talk to an accountant? And there's an instant response, that the consumer is
Yeah.
not going to choose that ease, that just because it's easy. Forget like if the person behind the screen knows anything or not, it doesn't even matter. It's path of least resistance. So you're going to have Intuit and other technology companies who are going to be coming in and doing accounting and tax work in a very different sort of way, in a different, again, that different business model. And you have all these stealth startups who are VC backed, who are building accounting companies that are serving specific types of clients in new ways. And again, it's just a different business model. So that's just the professional service firms model. But then you have all the tech and all the other things that are kind of pushing the market.
So I think that's already happening. I have a friend who works at one of the big investment funds, BlackRock, or so
Mhm.
they invested in a company that made software for accounting firms. And he told me that they have now opened their own India office where anybody who's using the software, they're offering them, hey, do you want us to help you with your tax returns? And he
Yep.
was like, they're seeing so much growth in that. So you're absolutely right. I think these big firms, they're going to come and take over all the uh, I don't want to say low level, but like low hanging fruit, right? All right, we can just take this right off.
And part of it is like, um, it's not right or wrong. It's just the market has changed. Like you can't get mad at the VC for coming in to build a new business model, right? Like you can't get mad at Intuit for seeing an opportunity and taking it over. You could get mad at yourself for not changing or not offering enough value for what you do, because I would argue that CPAs who are really good CPAs can own that professional relationship, which would be 10x, and you could probably charge 10x than the bot or the person behind the computer, right? Like who's part of a larger company, right? And you could own that boutique firm if that's what you want. But most CPAs haven't thought like that, and they haven't said like, I'm going to like hug my customers so well that I could charge enough and delight them. So like think like family office model, right? Like how is it that family offices make so much money? It's because they love those families so much and they're so boutiquey and they're so customer service, like they're the, you know, the high end of it. And that's where I think professionals could do really well, but most of them choose not to take that opportunity. Instead, they take, I'll say, I don't want to say yucky compliance work, but they take compliance work where it's the race to the bottom, as opposed to saying, look, you know, I want to be a specialty boutique type firm, and I'm going to charge bigger rates, and I'm going to delight with customer service. Instead, they go to the race to the bottom of compliance work that most of it can be automated away, and there's very little differentiation. And instead, they just get mad at their customers. They don't make they turn into these grunt work shops where they like just churn out work, and there's very little profit margin in it. And then they get mad, right? Like, so I don't know. Again, a lot of
I
this
mean,
is the firm owner who has to pick what they want to do and how they want to show up as a professional and what they want their firm to be.
they need to start thinking like entrepreneurs, right? Most accountants, they think like accountants, they don't think like entrepreneurs. And I think that's a big part of it. Because as an entrepreneur, you're always on the lookout for like growth, next opportunity. How do I increase my bottom line? And I don't see a lot of that in the accounting world. It's starting to happen now, but I mean, as you said, like more than half
So
is just grunt work.
you you also have to remember that the transition of firms. So if you look at most of the mid-sized firms today, they're second generation owners. They're not entrepreneurs who took that firm, right? Like
Mm.
the founders founded it in the 60s, right? Like, and all those old guys, they retired. And in like 2000 or whatever, you got the next gen who kind of took it over, right? But those partners weren't the entrepreneur who started the firm, especially when you're talking mid-sized firms, like the bigger
Yeah,
firms, right? They were the next generation, which is a very different mindset than the founder, right? Than the old guys whose name are on the door, or now they all turned to initials, but still, you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
it's a very different person. So when you look at who makes up the cloud firm owners today, they're very entrepreneurial because they're the ones who jumped ship, who left those mid-sized firms and said, I'm going to do it better. I'm going to do it different. And they think very differently than the rank and file at those mid-sized firms because they weren't entrepreneurs, right? And again, it didn't breed this entrepreneurial spirit. It just kind of built, how do we keep doing what we did, like kind of this, wash and repeat.
yeah. Agreed, agreed. Now that I think of all the firms I've been talking to, what you're saying is exactly right. Most of them started in like the 60s, early 70s. They're second generation ownership right now. And uh, it makes
Right.
sense.
And so now they're looking for an exit and they'll get bought. That, I mean, basically, because they didn't train the next gen either, right? So the reason they say,
Mhm.
well, they'll say, oh, anymore. Well, it's because again, they didn't build their leadership because they inherited it.
Yeah, makes sense. So, like the talent shortages that are happening right now, how is that making it more difficult for firms to make the changes that you're asking them to make, right? Build the next leadership, modernize things. Like, how is that impacting them?
So I think it's impacting them because a lot of them are just saying no to work, right? And they're looking elsewhere, which is good. Like again, like so they're thinking about alternatives. They're thinking about outsourcing. They're thinking about going to India. They're thinking about going to the Philippines. They're going to find additional sources of talent, which is not a bad thing. It just takes a different mindset of how to manage that, right? Like,
Yeah,
and it's not good or bad. It's just different. And when you have constraints, that's when innovation actually happens. Because if everything's easy, you don't change anything, right? So the pain is now great enough that they're saying, okay, let me think about something different. and let me think about how I can solve that problem differently. And so that's what they're doing. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's just it's just a new way of solving a problem that they've had.
So when you think of offshoring, right? When you think of like a global team, like what are some concerns that come to your mind, or what are some concerns that owners are thinking about?
So I think what I think about it is probably different than the way they think, because I'm very progressive
Okay.
in my thoughts. But I think if I was thinking about outsourcing, I would be thinking about process and just getting ready to manage work differently in a remote environment. Because ultimately, whether your team sits in California or your team sits in India or the Philippines, it doesn't matter. If they're working remotely, you have to manage the job and the project differently than if they're sitting in the desk sitting next to you. So for all these firms who are struggling with back to office or not, or remote work, right? They're like, oh, we want our employees back in the office, whatever. It's a fundamental mind shift of how you manage that work, how you manage that team to produce the level of work that you want. And that's the shift that has to happen. It's not just sending work overseas. It's redefining how you're going to manage that work and how you start. And so that's, I think, the big shift that business owners need to think about if they're going to engage with a team, a remote team or an overseas team. It doesn't matter how you're going to manage those people and how you're going to manage that work. And and that's, I think, the hard part, that because the things you used to do probably don't work exactly the same, especially when you're working async. Now, it's one thing to say, well, like everyone's going to have their teams on from 9 to 5, depending on where they sit. I don't care, right? But it's another thing when you have to pre-plan to give the work ahead so that they have their questions answered before, and they can work independently. And then I think it just takes a little flexibility on both parts to kind of figure out how to work together, and then to build those relationships, and then just to work. And ultimately,
Yeah.
it's a process. Just like you hire someone in the US, you have to hire someone, and some of them are going to work out and some of them aren't, right? Like not everyone makes a perfect hire. I don't care. Like they're like, but you just have to kind of go through those, that process. And then, you know, I would say chances are you're going to love your team there just as much as you love your team here. Um, and they're going to be a lot cheaper. So
Yep. So this is so very interesting, right? Because when I talk to like prospects and stuff, like my focus earlier was talking about, data security and cultural integration. But then after we spoke, like I started thinking, and I was like, you're right. Like the biggest resistance is just being comfortable with remote work and remote work across different time zones. That's an added challenge, right? So I think that you hit the nail on the head. That is what needs to change. People need to get comfortable with remote processes. They need to learn how to get results from a remote team, regardless of where that is. So
right.
that is one thing that definitely needs to happen. Um, and you also mentioned time, right? I always tell people that ask me about, hey, how long do I see an ROI? And I tell them that it'll take 2 years. Right? First year is going to be your year of learning, because if you have never worked with a remote team, you're going to find a lot of things that you're not doing well as a firm. All of those things are going to come to surface. If you're not giving feedback well to your employees, if you don't have processes like documented, written down, all of those things will come to the forefront. So you'll make those mistakes in the first year, you'll fix those in the second year, and starting the third year, you're going to start seeing a seamless operation where you give work at night, it gets done in the morning, you're saving half on salaries, you're starting to build a relationship with your India team or like a global team. So people need to know that it's an effort, but it pays off
Right.
in the end if you do it right.
Well, and I think it comes back to management, right? Like anything else, it's like you can only be mad at your employees or that team for so long until you take accountability for how you're part of the problem. And like you have to think about, how are you managing this group of employees. And whether they be sitting in India or they're sitting in California, they're going to be culturally different, right? Like, especially versus even someone who's sitting in New York, right? Like, there
Yeah.
are cultural differences even across the US that you have to kind of adjust to and get used to. And once you kind of get that, then you can figure out what makes them work, what doesn't work. And again, it's people. People are hard. I don't care. Like, tech is easier than people. It doesn't matter.
Oh,
Like,
absolutely.
tech is so much easier than people. So
So, like traditionally, the way offshoring worked was you worked with a third party, they gave you hours or dedicated resources. But now a lot of this concept of direct ownership is coming more and more into play. This is what the bigger firms did, and now like
right.
smaller firms can do it too. Where instead of going instead of working in these countries by a third party, you set up everything on your own. Like you have your own team, no one in the middle. You don't have to share your data with a third party. They're your employees. You get to build the culture. So, like, what are your thoughts on the direct ownership model? How do you think that's different or better than working with a third party?
Well, I think there's probably positives and negatives to whatever model there is. I just think that if you're thinking long term and you're building a team, why not have it be your team? That, I mean, it's as easy as that. And but you're going to have to do probably a little bit more process work, probably a little bit more um figuring out how it works directly with you versus if you were to work with someone who's more established, or like they do it for lots of firms, and it's kind of insert person here, but they're working for different firms, whatever. So I think it just depends on like what's important to you. But I know like the big firms who have their own offices, it's just like a remote office and it's their team. It's They don't think of it any
Oh,
differently.
absolutely. It's a heavy lift for the first year, for the first 2 years, because you're really setting up a new branch office, and there's a lot to learn, but it pays off in the end. I tell people that hey, it's like joining the gym, right? To like, the first 2 years, it's difficult, right? Just getting up, going there, but in the end, like the end result is going to be better.
Well,
And yes,
and I think the other question is if you don't do it today, what's going to happen in 2 years? You're going to be in the same boat, right? Like, so like if you're thinking about long term or whatever, and you're like, do you think the talent shortage is going to change? I don't think so. So like you
and
can start today and get moving, or you can wait 2 years and we can have this conversation again, and you'll just be like, wait, I should have done it 2 years ago.
I like that. I'm going to steal that. So there was one more thing, right? So a lot of firms, right? So they're now using their India teams or their global teams to kickstart innovation, right? So something like AI, right? They want to build tools that they can use. Um, so if you think the accounting shortage is worse, like the AI talent shortage is like 10 times worse. So people are using their global teams as innovation hubs. So I know a lot of bigger firms are doing it, but now like smaller and smaller firms are doing it, where they're building like a team of accountants, but also some tech folks who are helping them, build custom tools that they can use. We're building them layers that you can club with ChatGPT or other AI tools that they can use to, do a lot of things that you were saying. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, if you've seen any firms that are
Well,
doing that.
I mean, again, I think it's cool because like it's going to advance your firm faster. And realistically, if you can't find people here, how are you going to do it? So, um, like if you can use those team members to give you extra capacity to do other things, why not?
Absolutely, right? One thing we talked about on our last call was there are some firms who are actually pricing their offshore resources or offshore team members differently than their US team members, right? And that is just so frustrating.
Yeah, I
But
just shake my
I want
head
to
at
hear
that.
I want to hear your thoughts on that. Like,
Well,
why would they do that?
it goes back to AI. How do you build for AI? You don't, right? Like you should be pricing on outcomes. Why is someone who's sitting in another country that does the exact same work? It'd be different if, well, it's not even different, but like if they're doing the exact same work as someone who's sitting in California, why should they be priced differently? It doesn't make sense. So you should be pricing on outcomes. If you want to change your overall price because your cost is different, that's one thing. Like because you're doing it, though I would argue against that because I would say you should be pricing your customer, not cost plus, right? Like, but you shouldn't absolutely be putting a line item saying like outsourced worker bills at $60 an hour versus someone who bills at $120 an hour. Just stop. Like, just make it staff accountant or whatever it is. Like that's just crazy to me. It's just crazy because why is that person who probably may even have a higher level of education who's doing that same work getting billed at a less rate than someone who's sitting in your town? It doesn't make any sense because I know traditionally, like in India and other places, a lot of the workers are already CPAs. They have higher credentials than
Yeah.
the US employees. So like why you would have them at a lower rate is just beyond me.
I think it starts from a place of not being sure about your global strategy. I see a lot of firm owners who are working with Philippine teams in Philippines or India. They're still not telling their clients, and because they feel like there's a stigma. I don't know what my clients would think. I don't know how they would react. So they try to keep that secret, and ones who do divulge it, they're like, oh well, we're going to price it at a lower rate, so it's better.
You know what? We used outsourcing at my firm way back when, and you have to do 7216. I think you have to do some
Yeah.
disclosures and stuff like that, right? But you know what? Nobody said anything. Nobody cared. Like we got the first year we sent it, I think we got like 10 questions. And then afterwards, everybody just signed it, didn't even think about it, didn't even care. Most people don't care. They know that we live in a global society. Maybe it was different 20 years ago, but today, I don't think people care. And quite honestly, you're more likely to have your credit card stolen at a restaurant than if you have the security and everything, using an outsourced team, right? Like, so like people's perception of what security is not reality. You could have a more secure team in India and something could get stolen out of the mail more likely in the US than digitally. So like
I
you
love
have to
that.
be secure. Don't get me wrong. Like you have to follow your cybersecurity and all those rules and all that stuff. But don't think that you don't have the same security like that because it's sitting in India or sitting in the Philippines, it's any less secure than the US mail when you put someone's information in the mail.
I love that. I'm gonna steal so many things from this call, but you're absolutely right, right? Um, Getting your identity stolen at a restaurant is a lot more likely. And there are things that we can do, like culturally, that are okay in India and Philippines that wouldn't be okay here. So for our last client, right, their office has like biometric entry. There's no one who's not uh, allowed can enter the office. There's no printer in the office. There's cameras everywhere except the bathrooms, right? And the camera feed can only be like deleted by somebody in the US. Um, and then we run background checks, right? So there's like extensive background checks. So there's just so much more. I know some of the big companies, like I've heard this from employees that I've interviewed in India, they have software on their laptops that takes a screenshot every few minutes. And I was like, that's too much. But there's some companies that even do that. Like, I don't recommend that because I think you do that, you're going to lose good employees. But there are people doing that. So that's the level of security you can see. I I mean, if my employer told me that we're going to take screenshots from your laptop, I'm going to quit. I'm never going to work. But that's what's happening there.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, you need to do your due diligence on whoever you're working with and make sure that you do have that level of security. But again, I think our perception of what's secure versus what's actually secure is not necessarily, aligned correctly.
Oh, I completely agree. So we're running up on time. So, Jody, is there anything else you'd like to talk about that we didn't cover today? Anything from the book, from your book, anything about leveraging AI, or anything that we didn't touch upon that you'd like to share?
No, I think the only thing is that, don't look at the future as a scary thing or like something to be feared. There's so much opportunity. There's so much exciting things happening in the accounting space. I'm really excited of the future, the tech, all these things that are coming together, the market, the money, like outsourcing, all of it should make us be able to do our jobs better and serve our customers better. And if we look at it through that lens with the opportunity as opposed to fear, I think we'll be ready to conquer the world. And I think that's the way accountants need to think about it and not get so freaked out about like all the change. Instead, embrace the change and just start, living forward.
I completely agree. And for any accountants who are anxious about change, pick up her book, Radical Pricing. As you mentioned, it's not just about pricing, it's about building a modern firm. It's about building a better business model for your firm. So please go ahead and do that. Jody, thank you so much for your time. This was so much fun. I had a great time talking to you.
Awesome. Thank you.